make sure that you actually were able to see them. Let's see, I see a few other things in the chat here. Just a moment. Have a look. Okay, share my desktop. There we go. I see a few other comments here in the chat. Okay. As Bunny, I just noticed you typed to us, to get some help with that. Hopefully that will be resolved for next session, and we'll pay some further attention to that. And Hasnul has some problems with sound. Saravana, my view was to educate the management and business that implementing BCP is not a choice, it's a requirement. Yes, exactly. It's not just an optional thing. Very good point there. And also regulation standards that are required to be complied is linked to that, like things like Bank Negara or third-party compliance related to Bank Negara BCM standards, or any other standards. If you're compliant with ISO standards, for example, that also will help. And I see, please FTP again. Okay, I'll do that. And compliance works well, but it will lead the management to implement the basics to cover the guidance. Yeah, exactly, the guidelines from B&M. So I agree. It's just one of the many things. You still need other things as well. Let me share that file again. I don't know if I can do that this way. Share a file. For those who didn't receive our sticky note exercise. Now I think I need to put it as a transfer. Just a moment, I'll do that one more time. But you can all download our sticky note results from yesterday, the COVID-19, before we get on to the next topics. And that's in here. Over here. Yeah, so please download that again. It should be visible to you guys now. You basically right-click and download it. That's the easy way to do it. You can save that into your folder on your own desktop if you have that for this particular course. Also a comment here from Harry, budget is the most difficult to get buy-in for. Yeah, try to find some cheap solutions first, like we mentioned, mutual aid agreements, reciprocal agreements with other parties. Those things are not expensive. Things like maintaining good contact lists with staff, building teams, those things don't cost the world, The problem is when you start looking at, like recovery solutions for IT, that could be quite expensive. And then, then there's people who go, oh, this is, BCP is just a cost, something that costs us money. But you can also find some cheap solutions first and then get on with the other solutions later when people see the benefit of BCP. For example, for COVID, working from home could have been practiced more, not just in terms of getting better devices, but actually practiced better. People will see the benefit perhaps next time that there's that you're trying to plan for an incident. Okay, I hope you all got that file. Let me share my desktop for step 6. So step 6 is all about continuity provisions. Now this is what we have when we have our first 5 steps of the wheel. We now know what we need. Hopefully out of step 5, your BIA, you got some sort of priority listing of your key resources based on your NTPDs and RTOs. So you actually now know what you should recover first. And then you can start looking, of course, at solutions that actually provide that. So what we see in here is you're really reviewing your previous step, that priority listing for the recovery. And then initially, you could look at manual workarounds. Now here you can see, I'm smiling because I love this picture. manual workarounds still require effort and maintenance and time and testing and all of that, you know. So even if you have something in place, like the other day I was visiting a client, and that was all about if the mobile telephony networks were to go down. They said they've got a site where it's like a terminal where they transport coal. You know, it's an essential service in Australia, so I was still able to help those people on site. And what we talked about is if there's a mobile telephony problem, what can you use? And they said, well, we'll use walkie-talkies, you know, two-way radios. And I started looking around for younger staff and who were on the BCP team list, you know, who I knew they should use those walkie-talkies if there was a critical incident with mobile telephony. And I asked them, I said, well, what is a walkie-talkie? What's a two-way radio? And about 3 of the guys that I asked, they were all like in their early 20s, you know, and they didn't even know what it was. So then I said, okay, well, your name is on BCP to use those walkie-talkies if there's a real incident, you know, and can you try find out how to do that? So they talked to a couple of other colleagues in the business department. They didn't know. They thought maybe IT knows. So they asked ICT, and the ICT staff that they found said, I've seen a box in the server room, you know, with some of that old equipment. I think that's two-way radios in there. So they walked over there and had a look, and, you know, I was with them, of course, and I was just sort of looking over their shoulder what they were doing. And this box had like 5 centimeters of dust on it, you know, it was a box of these old brick-sized black, you know, two-way radios, and it was just sitting there. And I said, well, okay, we'll activate it, you know, start using these because, you know, we're practicing if the mobile networks are down. So, and they were trying to turn them on. Half of them didn't have any batteries in them. The other half of the walkie-talkies didn't have the default channel, you know. So these younger staff, they didn't know. There was no instruction with it. They didn't know how to turn them on. They didn't know how to get the right channel to communicate with each other. It was just, you know, bonkers, basically. It was really not a good thing. And so the assumption that the old way is always, you know, a workaround, that's all right for staff who worked there for the last, you know, how many years. But new staff, they don't know what the old way was. They don't know what if you say, look, instead of our automated system, we can just use manual, you know, writing notes and faxing that or putting it in an Excel spreadsheet or something that you worked with in the past. Younger staff who just joined, they don't know what that is. Or not just even younger staff, but people who have just joined the organization, they won't know what those workarounds were. So you still have to maintain them. You still need some checklists with them, some instructions, and regularly test them. So don't think that they're just free. You know, they also require some effort. They may be cheap or free in terms of the investment in physical equipment, but they still need maintenance. Right, so here we can see a whole bunch of strategies that you could choose from when you're trying to meet those RTOs that we talked about. Now, the fastest but also most expensive solution would be something like a mirrored site. And this is when we talk about the back end, right? The servers, your data center, your data backups. So mirrored sites, fantastic, but cost a lot. They are quick to initiate when there's an incident, but they do require a heap of investment and maintenance as well during the actual use of them. So mirrored site is when there's active. You know, you don't even know that someone has to flick a switch. Actually, you don't have to flick a switch. You don't even know you're logging on to this particular location or that particular data center. Like Gmail and Google, you know, like Facebook, they all have those sorts of solutions for their systems. And they're usually just for the 24/7 systems with huge, you know, numbers of transactions. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. Now, then there's hot sites. And that's a similar thing, but you still need a manual configuration or flicking a switch basically between the primary and the alternate site. So you still need a staff member usually involved, and all the data and the applications are there, but you still need to do that and have some sort of available person to validate it and then flick it. Then if you look a little bit lower, number 6 there is warm site. That's the next step down when we talk about data centers. That is when there's applications there, but you still need to restore the data from maybe from tape or from network backups and things like that. So it's not readily available, you know, it takes a little bit more time. And then if we go on to cold sites, that's number 3. That is, again, one step down when you talk about, you know, the data centers. And the cold side there is then you still have to install the applications. There may be some equipment there. There's a room there, of course, a data center room, but you still need a lot of work to get all that data on there, but also install the actual applications on there. And then there's rebuild and restore, one step down from there. And that is really, it's just a room. You still have to plug in everything. You still have to find, equipment. You still have to rebuild it. So it's quite a comprehensive solution. You're having to implement when there's an actual incident. And then there's no strategy at all. So that's, of course, when we still need to spend a lot of time coming up with a good solution and install it and all of that. So, and educate the staff on how to use it. And it's basically a long delay. Now that only serves the purpose if your RTOs didn't have to be that long, didn't have to be that short, sorry. So if your MTPDs were really long and the business had manual workarounds that could last them for weeks, that's when you could choose for certain parts of your environment, you could choose no strategy or rebuild and restore. And no strategy is really, I would not recommend it usually for anyone because it is really having no hope, no faith, no confidence, no story to your customers. So it's better to have at least a very minimum having rebuild and restore there. And then there's a number of solutions in between these boxes, in between these bubbles, and they relate more to the front end, like the user environment. So relocation in group facilities, in other group facilities, that is item 8 in there. That is usually also a fairly medium sort of level investment in terms of cost, but the time recovery is nice and short. So that means you're setting up your offices on a BAU basis where you could have staff, for example, using another office, walking in there, they already have a swipe card, they may have, what else would you have? Logins to the systems, you could actually log in from that particular office just like you would in your other environment, that kind of thing. So that's a relocation in other group facilities. It's basically using your own other spaces. Now, remote work is the next level down there, which is what we've all tried to implement during COVID, of course. It could be from home, it could be from a different location, from a client side, from a supplier side, all sorts of different solutions there. And with devices that are either BYOD, bring your own device, or that are equipped company devices that actually you can use remotely. Some people use dongles or specific network sort of other requirements there, or VPN connections and so on. And then 2 boxes down, there's reciprocal arrangements. We talked about those too, where you have a mutual aid agreement with another party, either for your system environment or for your user work area recovery, so where people are sitting and working. So the latter is probably the more comfortable and easy to instate because it's not so secure, whereas using another party's systems could be fairly sensitive, So you need to work out how you manage that. And then there's the wonderful mobile sites. Now, mobile sites are really useful for companies that have lots of locations or offices or sites in the countryside, for example, where there is no real location where you can recover to, where there's no spare seating in another building nearby. And we find it for mining companies, for example, or people who are working in electricity companies where there's locations out in the middle of nowhere. And they may have multiple locations fairly close by each other where you could theoretically work from one location instead of the other, but it's still there, usually quite big distances. So what we find is the mobile site solution could be like a truck, like a container that is on wheels, like a big truck that actually can be wheeled somewhere else, that can be driven somewhere else, that is equipped with laptops, satellite equipment, like satellite connections. So that works for some organizations in some regions of each country, that is more away from the big cities usually. Okay. So the next slide then talks about continuity risks. And that is related to, sorry, let me just put this up on screen. Yeah. Continuity risks. So that is when you come up with a smart solution, you think, but actually gives you more crisis. So, for example, when staff are using Gmail accounts to communicate with clients, but they're attaching sensitive business information, sounds like a great idea, because Gmail always works kind of. If your email system internally is melted down, you could use Gmail, but the potential for that risk to eventuate, that you might think you have a great parachute there, but if it's got holes in it, like security holes, gives you further potential reputational damage, etc. Because Gmail has been hacked as well. It's not as secure as we think. And even if it doesn't get hacked on the day that you're using it during a disaster, the potential for it and the customer seeing that you're sending certain things from that particular platform can already give you enough headaches, I think, and reputational damage. And I love this picture of this guy with the parachute. Of course, you know, the parachute should have been tested, because if your BCP has holes in it, like with this parachute, you may end up in more trouble. In this case, there's a whole heap of crocodiles on the shore. I hope you can all see that, but that's of course more trouble. Now, a whole heap of examples of continuity solutions. I think you probably can revisit that one day. Maybe have a quick read. I'll give you 2 minutes to read this, because every organization has different solutions that are of interest to them. So maybe have a read through this, like I said, for 2 to 3 minutes, and just see in your head in your mind, where you could see this applicable to you. There are locations and sites and companies that where only 3 or 4 bullet points would apply. So please have a look and see which ones you're already using, and also maybe which ones would be an idea for the future, you know, to create more business continuity in your business. I'm just going to grab a glass of water, so I'll be back in a second. So please read this and determine for yourself to what degree is this applicable, and maybe note down some of the things that you think are useful. Okay. Any comments? Feel free to chat. This is, like I said, this is not a list that applies to everybody, but there'll be some things that you might find useful for your business. And there are some big picture things in there, like you can see diversifying client base and distribution processes and things. So yeah, there are some things that might apply to you as well. So let me just check one thing here. Yeah, great. All right. So then the most important part of this whole workshop, the most important handout for sure, is the BCP on a page. And what it looks like is this kind of model. Now, you will be getting a handout for this, but I just thought I'll run you through it beforehand. So what we see here, we see everything from the course so far coming together in one model. And that is, on the top here, we see the consequence scenarios, like critical impact on staff, critical impact on buildings or physical assets, including hard copy documents, machinery, or access to those. Scenario 3 was all about the ICT impacts. Scenario 4 was about voice and SMS related to the communication. And then 5 was critical impact on external supplier. Now, we worked out that this was quite a good grouping from our step 2 risk matrix, that we bundled all of those incidents. And when you guys watched, the video about the flooding, or you remember potentially in KL some of those scenarios too, where all these incidents are happening, but there's usually, whatever it is, the incident that actually occurs, you can sort of bring it under these 5 impacts usually, or consequence scenarios. COVID-19 was a key example there as well. That was impact on staff, but also impact on buildings and physical assets, because people couldn't work from those locations anymore, or we needed more space between people, remember? Or we still have that potentially. And then also we had from COVID-19 impact on ICT, because people are now hammering the systems remotely. Is there enough network connection for that in the country, but also locally, or for your business? And are your systems ready for that kind of thing? And we also had in some regions, I mentioned one of our clients, being concerned about mobile telephony. There were some mobile failures as well because of staff being low on the ground with maintenance, etc., on some of those mobile telephony networks due to COVID-19. And COVID-19 also had the 5th impact, which was impact on external suppliers. If you had suppliers in regions that were heavily impacted by COVID, you might have had that particular situation where you guys are still okay in where you were working. Your business may have still not been affected by anything related to COVID, but a key supplier maybe had that problem. So some incidents like COVID-19 have ticked all the boxes. They were affecting all of those scenarios, or causing all of those scenarios. But there's other incidents where either you don't know what might happen tomorrow, like the volcanic ash cloud in Europe, strange things like that. You didn't think about it beforehand, so it wasn't in your risk matrix, but at least you can say it has certain impacts. So usually with these 5 impact scenarios, or consequence scenarios, we should call them, we can usually cover for most incidents that actually happen. And even if they're not, if they haven't happened before, and even if we didn't think about them beforehand. So on the left-hand side, and we see some examples of time-critical processes. And we group them in this case as well, like what is no matter when time-critical, or which things are only at certain times of the month or week. So here you see some examples for an organization. We talked about inbound and outbound comms being very, very critical, time-critical, as a process. Talked about process B, the ensuring health and well-being of staff, including salary payments. And once again, this is in the health and well-being of staff is no matter when, very, very critical. And you could say even B should become A and A should become B, because B is even, the ensuring health and well-being of staff is potentially more time sensitive. The reason why we put A being the inbound and outbound comms is communication and information provision to staff is often more important than actually fixing the problem. If staff know what's happening, they actually can anticipate delays or anticipate certain impacts on themselves. But if you have no communication, it's even worse than having some provisions in place, helping some staff with their health and well-being, but actually have no news to them on how long it might be that this thing is going to last, So these are fairly interchangeable in that sequence. So I usually choose A to be the inbound and outbound comms. And then B, health and well-being and staff payments. And then C, in this particular organization, was continue processing and delivering orders to the top 10 customers. That was interesting because that description really worked for that particular organization that we worked with, because they had another list somewhere where the top 10 customers were maintained, and that changed all the time, but they didn't want to change their BCP every week or so when there was a new customer on board. So that's why we just said top 10 customers. We didn't say who they were in the BCP, we just said the top 10. And that worked really well for them to keep the BCP nice and clean and simple and not changing all the time and not having a whole list of customers in there that were actually identified here in the time critical processes. And then what you see here is some of the work that we've been doing, you know, like the MTPD is what you see here as a value. In this case, we're talking 2 weeks. And that is for the intersection of impact on staff on the time critical process of inbound and outbound comms. And what the description here is in that this little first box on the left there is the initial workaround, which in this case is staff from the front desk or reception to call center, marketing, admin, and other departments sharing staff and using documented procedures. So this is basically a workaround if there's a staff impact that you borrow staff from other departments. And in this case, that organization said for 2 weeks they can handle that one. But after 2 weeks, they need to hire more permanent sort of staff, or you know, or find temporary or permanent staff instead of using staff from other departments. And they use recruitment firms on file. So that is their longer term provision during a disaster period. Yeah, so that is over 2 weeks. If we think a disaster is going to go beyond 2 weeks, that's when we say that. And one of you guys earlier asked about time frames. Well, this is how that works, you know, to actually chop it into certain sections, you know, and say this is how the initial workaround is and what we need beyond that. And all these boxes are MTPDs. So these two boxes together show the MTPD for that particular process of process A and scenario 1. And you can see that's done for all the other ones as well. And what I'd recommend there is that you don't use hundreds or dozens of different timeframes there, because when you do these interviews with the different departments and you ask how long can they go with the manual workaround, someone might say 4 hours, and then the next person says 3 hours, and then someone else says 5 hours for their workaround. And what I would say then is agree on maximum three timeframes across the whole board, across the whole business, for all the time critical processes, for all the different scenarios, for all the different departments and their activities that play a role in there. So with this particular example, we found that there were some processes that really needed to be instated within 2 days, 2 business days, we called it there, because they had Monday to Friday that they were up and running with their business, and Saturday, Sunday, they never worked normally on these processes, or their business was just shut during the weekend or something. So that means we call it business days, and we said 2 business days is the shortest time frame for that company. And then we have maybe 2 weeks, and then we have 4 weeks. And those 3 time brackets is all we used for the entire business. We didn't give people the option to go with all their variations of a half a day here and another half a day there. We were actually saying, okay, these are the time frames. Some businesses would have 20 minutes and then 2 days and then 1 week, you know. So it depends on your business, but what I recommend is make no more than 3 and see how that works for you. Use it for a while. Have a look next year if any of these processes needed more detail or more detailed, you know, changes to their time frame, and you need to add another time frame. I recommend maximum 3. It worked for me for the last 12 years with all organizations I worked with this particular chart, and none of them said, "Oh no, we need, you know, another time frame, another time frame." What they're used to is having all these templates in BIA, etc., with dozens of time frames, or people writing down any type of time frame. But when IT then gets these lists from all the divisions, my experience is ICT look at it and they go, well, you know, I'm not going to monitor every single 20 minutes or every hour what I've restored for whom, you know. It's going to be best effort anyway. So I'd rather keep it really simple, use 3 time frames, use this type of model, which is absolutely unique. If there's one thing that I'd like to protect with my business is this intellectual property. It's the most important piece of documentation we've ever produced, and it is really it's gone through a number of iterations to keep that BCP on a page possible. not go too much information, not too little. Don't use acronyms in here. Don't use big lists of things. Hyperlink if you need to, that's fine. But, you know, describe things in these boxes that anyone can understand. Anyone at the top or the bottom, no matter who, can understand what it says. Now here we have used the word DR, but at least we've described what is DR. You know, use, like I said, acronyms. You'll shut off a lot of senior people for sure, and you'll shut off 90% of the junior or the more low-level staff who don't work with that particular acronym. You know, so you know that's 99% of the organization not reading your things because they're going, oh, another acronym. You know, what is that? DR and IT and whatever. You know. And there's other, and if you put things in there like MTPDs and, you know, describe what it is, then at least at the very minimum. So that's the structure of the BCP on a page. And the handout that I'm going to send you guys, what I really would like you to do is, once again, in subgroups, and I'll make the breakout session for every subgroup. What I'd like you to do is download the handout before you enter the breakout session, and then have that somehow on your screen available to edit. You know, I'll make sure that you guys receive the PDF as well as the Word document. The Word document will have the option for you to type things in there. Yeah, and I'll show you a little bit more about the handout in here. What you see in there, continue inbound and outbound.com, for example, you see there's some explanations on all of these workarounds. You'll see some examples in there. You'll see in the handout also examples of time-critical processes or how you define those. One is from the banking sector, one is from the transport sector, for example. You know, you'll see there some meat behind all of this. And at the back of the handout, the last 2 pages are blank, as in they're the same model, but now the boxes are clear. So you can actually use that for this exercise and for building the BCP in your own organization. So I'm basically granting you the copyright to use this in your own organization as you require to build your own BCP on a page. And like I said earlier, you know, please don't use it externally. Keep this for your own organization only. So let me try and transfer that handout. I'll shut off the screen share for that because otherwise I can't transfer the file. And then I'll make those breakout rooms, and this will be a very, very useful exercise for all those people amongst you who are trying to build their improved BCP process, their BIA, you know, and it basically brings BIA and BCP together at that one-page level. So it really touches on all the different aspects of the organization. And behind these boxes, behind all these descriptions, you might find 3 departmental lists or plans that actually make that particular solution possible. But the top management are not going to read those departmental plans. You know, they're not going to read those details. So what I'd like with that BCP on the page is that it is readable by the top, but also like the more junior levels, if people want to have a bit of an understanding of what the BCP is all about. Let me have a quick look. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to have a look at the transferring of the file. So I'll do the PDF and the Word document, but for the exercise, the Word document is probably the easiest for you to use. You can type straight away your partially completed BCP in there. It usually takes a bit more time than that, but it's with the first half hour of the effort, you can probably get quite well on your way. Okay. That's the Word document you'll find in there. So please download that file, save it somewhere carefully, because it's something that you'll be able to use in the future as well. And then over here is the PDF as well. Please, 1 or 2 people, if you can confirm in the chat that that was successful, that you can download those files properly. Basically, right-click on those files if you like, and then save as or download. Thanks, Saravana. You work in IT, so I'll give the other guys a little bit more time. You're, of course, an expert on all these things. So that's the files you're going to be using. Now I'll work on those breakout sessions. So start reading that document to get an understanding of what it's all about. And In the meantime, I'll work on these breakout sessions. So please start reading that document, go through it, especially the first 4 or 5 pages. They contain a lot of sample information. And I'll make the groups based on your actual colleagues, companies, because for this one it's useful if you do this with a actual colleague. I know that you guys have been working really hard also at the end of the morning. I just wanted to hear from the group representatives. What did you think about the template? Oh, actually, I should probably, with a few people still in the breakout session, let me just check that and end all of those. I think we had the banking and finance one. I'm just checking what else is in. Okay. Yeah, the group on banking and finance. Does someone want to take or give a quick update on what you guys thought? Have you been working on that template? Let me just see who we had in there. Maybe so one is insurance or banking and insurance. Is Harry, are you back? And are you able to respond? Harry is still in the call. Okay. Amina, I'm going to give you the word if you don't mind. So you're for an agricultural bank, right? Agrobank.
Yes.
How did the template apply to you if you start filling in some of the processes?
Okay, I can start by, it's similar to the one that you gave us. It's just that I did not change the time critical processes. It's just that the critical impact I changed to our organization.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Continue inbound and outbound communication. We get the time critical impact on staff. The time is less or same to 2 hours. Backup staff take over under the critical impact on staff. Okay, under the critical impact on building, we opt for alternate site and work from home. And then on IT system, we inform customers about the system failure and to go through workaround.
Yeah.
Whereas for mobile devices, mobile service, voice and SMS communication, we manage through web chat via corporate website or email or social media.
Good.
And then
timings around those as well, like how long will it last you? That sort of solution. Did you come up with that already?
If it is less than 2 hours, if it's more than 2 hours, more than 4 hours, we would also go through the web chat and website and social media.
Yeah.
The critical impact on external suppliers for this issue, there's no impact for external suppliers.
Yeah, it could be that you don't have any external suppliers for that process, you know.
Yeah.
But if you go to something like clearing or something like, you know, clearinghouse or something, you might have external parties there. So
Yes.
it's on each process. So for that first process A, you don't have any external parties, for example. That's really good. And so we'll stick with one process for each of the group representatives in this course to comment on, if you don't mind. But that was really good. And also that you thought about the timings. You mentioned 2 hours or 4 hours. The trick is with those time frames, those MTPDs, it doesn't mean you're not caring for half a day or 2 hours of it, right? Like you've got a workaround that it kicks in immediately, and that can last up to a certain point. And you mentioned for you guys that, for example, if you put a web notice and things, up to 2 hours you can handle that, or up to 4 hours, and then it becomes like kind of too bad. You know, people start complaining too much and all that. So for you guys, that's 4 hours, and then that's the thing. It's the limit where your manual workaround doesn't work anymore. That's how you should see that time frame. So the workaround, you kick in straight away, you can last it up to that particular time, and then you'd expect a more semi-permanent solution, or not quite permanent, because it's still a disaster mode that you're in, but you know, a more suitable solution. So yeah, so you've really done a good job, and also that you came up with like 2 hours, 4 hours, and maybe the next one would be 1 week or 2 days or something for different projects. So, yeah, so thanks for sharing. I hope all you guys have a similar experience, of course. So can we hear from the next group? What about curriculum? I think maybe Hashnul was probably the representative in that group. Can I please give you the word to comment on that one? Hashnul?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very good.
Perfect. Okay, what we've done is we use the template that you've given us, and we try to implement or place the critical processes in co-op against this. And personally, I think this is quite beneficial for us because we've not approached a BCP like this before.
Yeah.
So just to give you an example, one of the key processes for co-op being a pension fund is investment. So one of the activities is to place investment in public equity.
Yeah.
So and the critical impact was on staff. So assuming that the whole team to execute this trading is disabled, the function is disabled. So what we've stated here is we have the option to contact an external fund manager to execute the trading for us.
Yeah.
Yes, that is what we haven't really explored in terms of the time frame. So we maintain the time frame as what is stated in the template, which is 4 weeks. Then if let's say the impact is on the building or physical assets, what we stated here is IT will activate the DR and staff will execute the transaction at the alternate site.
Yeah, but that's the third scenario, right? That is scenario 3.
That's the second scenario.
Because the second one assumes that you're talking mainly also about staff and where they're seated normally. So your IT DR is also part of your building, I understand. Like you guys have that in the same building, is that correct?
Yeah, we have 2 buildings, so with 2 sets of servers. So each server are replicating each other for both buildings. So if let's say the one in KL, the server were to be impacted, and then we will recover the systems over in the other building.
Yeah, but you'd put the same comments probably under scenario 3 because that's lots of IT. Is that correct?
Correct. We would do that, but we will not require the staff to be mobilized to the alternate site because yeah,
I understand. Yeah, so that's really good. And have you got any seating normally for staff? You mentioned training or trading, right? Like
trading, yeah, equity trading. Yeah.
And can staff do that from elsewhere as well? Like, can they do that from home and all of that?
Yes, actually, because of COVID, they can, but we do have an internal policy that any investment tradings are not allowed to be conducted outside of the office premise.
Sure.
So the strategy, the first approach of the strategy is always to abide to the policies and guidelines. But because COVID, the MCO, the Movement Control Order, was issued by the government, so we had to seek an exemption for the policy for the investment to be traded at home.
Yeah. Good. Okay. And did you also look at external suppliers? Is there an impact on that, or?
Yes. So as mentioned earlier, if let's say our internal staff are impacted, we would rely on external fund managers. So these are investment companies who execute trading for other companies. So now, in the event that they are being disabled, so we can consolidate all the planned activities, planned investment trading to be executed internally.
I see. So you can organize it yourself. Yeah. So that's
Yes.
the strategy if there's a key supplier failure, scenario 5.
Hmm.
And telephony would be quite important for your team as well, I'm assuming, or via Teams and WebEx and all this stuff?
Sorry again, can you please repeat that?
No, from my experience in investment banking and so on, telephony, like having dedicated phone lines and so on, is also quite important for deals.
Yes, correct.
Scenario 4, have you got a good strategy for that one too?
We do. So which we are implementing this as well during COVID, because if they were to use their mobile phones, then the call will not be recorded. So we have this software called Skype for Business, where they can make calls from the computer itself, from their laptop, and these calls will be recorded. They just need an external microphone, just to ease the call instead of using the laptop's microphone, something.
Yeah. Very good. I really enjoy hearing all of this, because you've got this strategy already kind of in your mind, but now if you put it on the BCP on the page, people will see how it all fits together and that it really ticks all the boxes. Does that make sense? It's not so random anymore. Like in COVID, everybody was running around doing random solutions, but actually now that you've tested it all during COVID, you can now say this is actually part of our general recovery strategy, continuity strategy, because you've already validated it.
Yep.
So that's really excellent. Thanks for sharing that. Let's see. I'm not sure if let's see if is Larry. So you're in the other group there, or maybe actually Petronas we haven't heard from as well. See if we can get Firdaus up. Firdaus, can you hear us?
Yeah, okay.
We can hear you too.
So basically for this template, the consequence scenario is not far from our template. Our consequence scenario will be focused on the PEPAI, which is also people, equipment, technology, asset, and also interdependencies. So so it's quite easy for me to fill up. Just we do it some amend number 5. So because of for the supplier, because we are focused on the process that continue submitting order through secure system, which is SAP. So for example, I'm in the Petronas Garangan, retailer for Petronas, to ensure our petrol station even though under crisis, so they have stock. So ensure the ordering from the customer, fulfillment, everything is under the control. So for number 1, in case of impact to our staff, we do have like a manual work process, which is for the staff at the same department. For example, they are doing ordering, fulfillment, take the order, do the scheduling. So all the supervisor, clerk, exec, and also media management, at least they know the basic how to perform the work using the SAP system. So this is quite critical. In case less than 24 hours, this staff are not available. So actually, the same function outside our, I can say, division of Petronas Garangan, maybe I can call it a Petronas Chemical. So they are performing the same function. Maybe not the same system, but the similarity is there. All the work process is just similar. So after the 24 hours, if all the Petronas Garangan staff are affected by pandemic, so in our HR, we allocate, find another department that can perform the same function. At the time, we do have a group IT that's centralized, and they have some background about the system. So at least they can do the same work as what we did. So, and number 2, of course, for the building is not accessible. For all Garangan staff, our recovery strategy is work from home. So basically, either more than 24 hours or less than 24 hours, our coverage strategy is the same. All can work from home.
Yeah,
Just
hold on. What about, because that second scenario is also your non-office staff, like your site staff, people who work in more like the, well, where they do the fulfillment, for example, any warehouses. So did you look at that one as well?
yeah, okay. For those at the maybe warehouse or plant, we do have that minimum manning. So even though that staff, even though that site or warehouse unable to provide the stock, we do have like the diversion strategy. So in Malaysia, we have few warehouse, few plant. So we allocate where nearest warehouse or plant they're able to supply us with the stock.
Yeah. And so that goes in your scenario too, for the fulfillment process. There should be some comments in there how you're going to do that and what your workaround is and so on. Yeah. Very good. Thank you for sharing. We'll leave it at that. But it's so great to hear the different business processes as well, because you obviously have a very different process, like this fulfillment, like delivery to all the different clients.
Yeah.
Totally different from the other responses so far. So thank you. Okay, and then the last group was the mixed group of different industries. Maybe we can hear from I think Iswani came into that session this time correctly. So you're most welcome to take the call if that's okay. Are you able to hear us, Iswani? Iswani has some problems with the sound before. Otherwise, maybe Christopher, can I please ask you to, Chris, are you able to comment on the group?
Okay, so we did a bit of discussion. I wasn't really doing much for myself because I was still trying to digest the notes.
Yeah, that's good. No, well, that's really important too. Some people don't get through the whole thing, but it's at least if you understand the philosophy and the structure of it. Is there any of the other processes or something spontaneous that you can mention about how you will implement this in your organization?
Well, for us, I think the most important thing would be ensuring the health and well-being of staff. That would be number one. But in terms of the time critical process for my side, because we're a water supply company, so I think our work process would be the second thing which we'll be looking at. Making sure that there's continuous water supply, and just thinking based on the need and demand of our company. The time period for the priority is going to be the maximum probability of disruption is going to be very, very small.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, probably across the board, because the staff needs to be alert and communication with not just the customers or the consumers, but also the authorities is going to be very short if they alert them immediately, and also impact on supplies and stuff. Not so much on supplies, but more on the staff, the buildings, and communication. That's going to be very, very critical for us. Should definitely be an issue when it comes to water supply.
Yeah.
Okay, and the feedback into the organization, it was a bit tricky because different facilities contribute to the company in different ways. So I was looking at the most critical facilities, should there be an issue. And I think it's more on looking for backups, because when it comes to water treatment, it's a bit, there's no manual workaround for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so perhaps I could have looked at different processes.
Yeah, thank you also, Chris. And once again, very different business altogether. And with those workarounds, like that's the only thing that determines the NCPD usually, And so it's not like I said, I'll just explain again. If there is any form of manual workaround, like, and it lasts for a while, then it's at least it's a nice feeling that you don't have to have everything from the first minute up and running in full capacity. So that's yeah, that's probably impossible. So that's why we encourage all the people around us always when we do this work to think about those manual workarounds, really develop them and test them and write them down with checklists so that they're actually reliable, you know. So yeah, very good. Just give me 1 second. Great. Yeah, so we'll go back to the slides, but this was excellent, guys. Thanks for doing that work. Okay. So the next section, now that we have some strategies in place and continuity provisions and manual workarounds, we now need to start looking at how do we document that, so to keep it simple and small and still insightful for people and useful. The typical guideline I have around documenting actual activation procedures is try to come up with quick reference cards or checklists that don't repeat the blatantly obvious. You know, what people already know naturally as part of their role and all of that. I find people writing long checklists and they're full of those standard activities that people already actually know. You know, the BCP team members, if they already know certain steps because naturally they do them all day long, don't duplicate any of that. I would probably refer to something like standard operating procedures. But the rest of the steps in there should be things that are not so natural to people. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, otherwise you get enormous documents. Yeah, and we want nice and concise things that people can save on their smartphone, that you know that you can really use when you have your first meeting in a crisis sort of modus, and not reams of paper to dig through. So that's what the aim of this section is really come up with some quick reference card type models. Now here you can see a little bit of an overview. We tend to document really well the top two, the premises and IT recovery, so facilities and IT recovery. But all the rest of it, we tend to be pretty poor at, you know. So if you look at all different organizations, not many write down how to deal with paper-based documentation, crisis decision-making, staff availability, transport, including transport of staff, you know, to alternate sites, etc. Crisis communication and public relations, access to supplies. If a supplier turns up on site and it's locked off because there's been a fire or flood, you know, what do you expect that supplier to do? How are you going to call them? All those sorts of nitty-gritty things that people forget. And the same, like I said, with transport. I remember actually making a strategy once with one organization where they had a special, like a gold status with one of the bus companies nearby or locally. And so they would be preferred customer if the whole city was flooded or something and they needed quickly some sort of transport out. They were one of the first who would actually get those buses because they paid, I think, maybe the equivalent of, I don't know, 1,500 ringgit or something per year to get that status, you know. So to know that if everyone needs transport options, then at least we are going to be, you know, top of the list there. So that's some of the things you can remember or implement if you're doing this work. And remember also the plan is only a guide. Like when you're documenting your whole activation process, a lot of people always are looking for all the detail has to be perfect and loads of lists and things to do. My experience is it's only a guide anyway, and when a real incident strikes, it's never going to be exactly the way you thought. So whilst you assumed a whole range of things, like for example, you assume a evacuation or something that the power in the building is still working. Well, what about if they're both down? So the doors are wide open, the building is down, but also your power supply is down, your electricity. That creates a different complication, you know. So you can't write every single combination in Murphy's Law, you know, in checklists and procedures. So that's why we really encourage people to think, look, the plan is only a guide. It's really something that should be like a toolkit, you know, a set of documents or lists or things that you can grab as required. And because of your team structure and your excellent trained teams, they don't need the A to Z procedure for everything. They can also come up with that with them, with the right tools. So I use the toolkit approach more than the end-to-end process and procedure definition. Okay, and here you can see the phases that we talked about in step 3 of the framework. Remember, we said there's some sort of disruption and initial response. And then we've got phase 1, 2, and 3. And in the board game, we worked with all of that at the time. Sorry, I'm just noticing that my screen is also taskmaster. Let me just move this down and maybe hide. Okay, yeah. So here you can see that overall picture there. Now, the first phase of initial response, remember, emergency management, we're talking about things like determining first what is actually a disruption or what could cause an actual business continuity event. Because you don't want to knee-jerk into invoking plans if it's not needed. But also, you don't want to wait too long when all the other people, all the other competitors, whatever, have already invoked their plan and have taken all the resources, like, you know, the spare generators and the air conditioning units and the advice of certain key consultants. And, you know, if all of that is happening during an incident, you don't want to be the last knocking on the door of these service providers. So you've got to be also quick on your feet, but, you know, do the assessment properly. And so what else is in the realm of emergency management? Things like people safety and well-being. You can think about emergency kits, especially if you're in somewhere remote, in a remote location. We find that there's quite a focus on those sorts of kits. And there's a bit of a list there on what you could put in them. Security of your primary site, especially if you're evacuated, think about that, because there's people who are looters, who are actually looking out for those situations because they know all the doors are open and the lifts are not working, and people could just, you know, theoretically they could run up the fire stairs and grab some laptops and things, and before you know it, there's been theft and problems like that. So security of your primary site is important. And then, of course, stabilizing the incident, so not making it worse. Remember, we had a focus on assets as a second priority. After the people, we then need to think about assets. And so stabilizing that or reducing impact on assets. Crisis control room or command center is then the next step as well, which initially could be virtual, but my experience is that most managers want to eventually see each other face to face to be able to make some critical high impact decisions. And then managing the event, including like damage assessment and responding to media inquiries, and especially if there's injuries to staff due to the incident, or death or liability, are horrible things, of course, you know, but that's where there's a lot of distraction, and you find your senior people being distracted with that situation and not even thinking about business continuity. And that's not such a good thing, because if business continuity also doesn't get attention, then you've got potentially also a lot of backlash from customers and people who are concerned about their products and so on that they're supposed to receive from you. So, yeah, so what you prefer with that is that you have a dedicated subgroup of your crisis management team, for example, who are dealing with that internal issue or with that injury or death liability, and the rest of the team who starts coordinating the business continuity process. Because, yeah, like I said, I've seen many of these senior management or crisis management teams actually being distracted into one rabbit hole, if I can say that, in one direction, and not coming out. And in the meantime, there needs to be decision made about business continuity, etc. So notification, planning, and crisis communication, that's also important. Let me just check. Yep. When we talk about crisis communication, we're talking about internal as well as external parties, and they all have their own needs for information. They all have their own media or platforms that they use for that information, receiving the information or exchanging information with you. So whilst general staff may be okay with Facebook updates and corporate website, there may be others, you know, for example, your shareholders who need a call in person from your CEO, you know. And then there's also people like next of kin who would expect, if something were to happen, injury to their partner or you know, to their spouse on site. Of course, they want a personal call maybe from HR or also from the big boss of the company. So that's really important to craft, that you have you know, internal and external parties, and they all have different stakes in the game and different requirements in terms of communication. Then people management during a crisis. We talked about people first, like needing attention. You saw here in this item, the second bullet point was all about people safety. Now, communication is one thing, but also trauma management, flexible work arrangements, if they can actually keep on working from home, rotating staff at recovery sites, moving key staff to different office or country, and then safety and health procedures for staff and mix of kin and returning experts. So that's some of the topics that will come through when you're doing this work. And then high-level decision-making, when and how to declare a disaster, procedures and checklists for escalation, contacting all the BCP team members, and then some response mechanisms. And of course, having a look at what you can do in advance. For example, when you're making decisions or on a particular issue, having a really good damage assessment checklist is great, so that you can craft that in advance to have something to rely on. And other things you could do is invocation notifications. So a notification to your external site provider or to your utilities or anything that needs formal notification of you diverting staff or IT or whatever to another building. That cannot be just a casual process. That has to be formalized, because in theory, someone bad could pretend to flick a switch and go and tell your phone company that all the phone calls should be diverted to another number, or they could, in theory, divert all the couriers and suppliers to a different location, even if that's not even needed. And so you need to have proper authorized people involved in approving those. Okay, now this quick reference card example I've pulled out from some of the work that we've done overseas in different parts of the world, and we call it the 1-minute incident assessment checklist. So on the left-hand side, you see that there's a number of items there, in this case grouped by the nature of that scenario. So the first one was impact on staff. The second one was related to power. In this case, building assets are related to power plants because it's a power generating company. Very similar to, for example, Petronas, who would have, and possibly also, I would say, the water plants where Christopher works. You have a lot of physical assets, and there's some requirements for health and safety, and there's a whole heap of dependency on key assets. So the first scenario, you have some questions. The second scenario being related to the buildings and assets, you also have a set of questions there. And then IT systems, a couple of questions, voice communication and external service provider. So all of these are questions on the left, and then an answer tick box. And based on the answer tick box, you then go to the next step onto the right. So if you tick the first box, you then have to move to the right-hand side of the screen as well for your work. So for example, if, let me find a specific example there. Okay, the second line there, are all staff and contractors and suppliers and visitors and trainees, are they all safe? Now, if the answer is no, or you don't know, then ensure staff and contractors, suppliers, visitors, etc. are removed from immediate danger and address the source of the danger. Consider an evacuation of the site, following by relocation or other location to another location that is out of danger. Liaise with emergency services as required and maintain contact with OSHA, which is sort of your health and safety representative, and regulators if relevant to the situation. So, like I said, on the left-hand side is the assessment question, and on the right-hand side is then the initial actions you're going to take. And these are very similar to what you would find in your risk matrix. Yeah, so you can actually get some inspiration from there. And in this one, make it really simple key questions that people can answer, like I said, in 1 minute. If you can look on the left-hand side here, those questions you can quite easily tick the boxes in. And the final section there, after the 5 scenarios, we also then ask, is the expected incident duration likely to exceed? And that is then across all your processes and scenarios, what is the shortest maximum tolerable period of disruption? So remember that we had this sheet here that we were working on. Sorry. Over here, you had quite a lot of MTPDs. Some may have been 2 hours or 4 hours or 2 days or 1 week or whatever it was. And what you want in there is that the shortest one across the whole sheet, which in this case is 2 business days, that's the one you want to be able to add to this picture here. Let me see. Yeah, that's the one that you want to be able to, this quick reference card sheet, which is your, let's say 2 business days. That's your expected maximum duration during which your manual workarounds still apply across the whole organization. So the shortest common denominator is what you would put in here, because that's the first moment when you start, now, yeah, maybe not panicking, but slightly getting nervous, you know, about we have to have, if the scenario goes beyond that point, we need to have some solid provisions in place. Right, this template I'll leave with you as well. So the departmental continuity plan is then structured according to the same processes and the same core consequence scenarios. And for each of those, you're going to write down your involvement in that process and what your initial workarounds are for your department, for your division, you know, to contribute to those processes. So the structure is very similar to a BCP on a page, but then it goes into more detail about the ones where you do participate in. It goes into more detail than on the BCP on a page. This is what it could sort of look like. You know, you see their departmental continuity plan, and then it says here what is the department. In this case, that's human resources. And then you see some general information there, key supplier contact details. And here, a question, how is your department involved in that process on a BAU basis? So for example, human resources have answered that one for the payroll process. And they're saying basically our department is the main processing team before a payroll file gets passed to finance. So it just describes a little bit about what they do. Sorry. And then scenario 1, you can see there, and then scenario 2, scenario 3, scenario 4, etc. And only C and E are highlighted here because it just happens to be so that human resources only play a role in those processes in this particular organization. In my experience, process A about communication actually should tick all the boxes underneath, all departments, because all of them have at least a communication role, even if that communication is go home and wait for further notice and you don't need to come to work because, you know, your work is not time sensitive. That could be one of the things. Yeah, but the idea is to have that kind of approach where you keep it really simple and to put those bullet points, etc., underneath in each of the boxes. Okay, now here we see a aggregated sheet. Now this should be of interest to any ICT people and also to facilities people. So, and actually it combines all of the earlier work that we've done with the BCP on a page and the departmental plans that support those boxes in the BCP on a page. That will show you each of these departments. In this case, we put some departments there, like executive management, marketing, HR, sales, or PR, sorry, sales, call center, IT, voice communication, admin, HR. So that's the departments in the organization that you'll find here. And then up the top, you see the time frames. Remember that we said 2 business days, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or in the other scenario that we found with the dealing room example, it may have been 2 hours, 4 hours, 4 hours, you know, or 20 minutes, 4 hours, 1 week. So those time frames you put up the top here, the exact time frames you chose in your BCP on the page. And then on the left, you find all these critical resources that have been nominated. Could be pieces of equipment or assets, could be printers, fax machines, scanners, but also in section 3, lots of IT systems, you're looking at all the critical applications. You can list in there and then say, okay, to what degree do all these departments require that particular equipment? Okay, then plan distribution and safekeeping. That means how often do you apply updates and where do you keep copies? Best practice tends to be at least 1 hard copy type for certain people, like the crisis management team. Sounds really old-fashioned, but there are days where you know, due to an incident, there's going to be no mobile network, there's going to be no SMS, maybe you had it on your phone, but the phone is flat by now, those sorts of thoughts. And yeah, in that regard, what you want is something really simple, and using a 12 monthly update kind of cycle or 6 monthly. Bank Negara Malaysia, I think, for the finance institutions, they obviously look at that, and I think what they initially put is 6 to 12 monthly, and it really depends on your corporate strategy as well. Like if your strategy cycle, you know, if that is a 6 monthly thing or 12 monthly thing, then you can probably stick with that kind of thing with maintenance. Hard copies versus electronic. Yeah, hard copy could also be in the form of USB sticks or CD-ROMs or something. CD-ROMs are really out of date now. USB sticks are still good. You can get them encrypted as well. So that means that you could actually, use that and make sure that that's one of your mechanisms there. I also see people use intranet, and they also use SharePoint. SharePoint is really a good one because I think it's free anyway, and it also interacts with your Outlook, appointments. So you can link, for example, a test or a walkthrough that you're doing to those Outlook appointments straight away. And yeah, it's quite a snazzy system actually. And like I said, it's free and everybody has it. So you don't have to train people as to how to maintain this stuff. You know, all your BCP documents, I believe, should be either on the LAN, on the local area network, or SharePoint or something similar where people are already accustomed to use that environment, you know. And I know that quite a lot of our clients use Dropbox, and they say, hey, everybody knows, you know, every day they could be doing something on Dropbox, or they could be sent somewhere to click, please fix the problem on Dropbox. But yeah, it's obviously up to you how you're going to craft it. I think it's a good idea. You know, if you had your main system, meaning the LAN, for example, then you had as a backup option, you had Dropbox or, you know, one of the other backup facilities. And in between, you might have other things, you know, smaller things like, for example, a version that, let's see, the USB sticks we talked about. Yeah, a version that can kind of sit there, and when you really need it, if there's nothing else available, at least you can grab that from somewhere. But it's pretty tough to imagine where that would be, you know, where you could keep it safely. So a quick exercise in our chat, and let me initiate that for you guys to have a think about, is what should an agenda of the crisis management team meeting look like? The very first agenda. So you guys are the BCP facilitators. You're going to initiate a call with the crisis management team, for example. They're going to have their heads together to make decisions on what to do and what to invoke. What would be on their agenda? What sort of tasks, what sort of topics would they be talking about? So it's a very flexible discussion. You don't have to be perfect at any of this stuff. It doesn't have to look perfect either. But what I would ask you to do is at least type something in that chat. I'm just looking where I can find it myself. Okay, I think got that here. Let me see if I can. I can't see the chat anymore for some reason, but if you guys can go in there, in the meantime, I'll work it out. So can you please have a think about this question? What should the agenda of the crisis management team meeting look like? The very first meeting, what kind of topics would they discuss? And type it in the chat so we can all read it afterwards and just have a bit of a discussion. I will share with you any of these models. I remember, or, you know, the yellow one. I think that's also available as a PDF. I'll have a look at it, but yeah, that's quite useful. So please discuss in the chat, what should the agenda of the crisis management team meeting look like? What are the key issues on there? And especially the things that you have seen people forget, you know, like that were not perfectly done at all. But yeah, people are not always remembering all of that. For some reason, Marianne. Oh yeah, there it is. I thought that the chat was disabled, but here it is. Yeah. So if you can please type in the chat any sort of ideas on what the crisis management team should be talking about in that very first meeting. Yeah, so for the next 3 to 4 minutes, please type in there. Excellent. Thank you very much, guys. I can see a lot of good comments there. Some things about budget, a few things about assessment report, of course, yeah, of the crisis at hand, declaration of a disaster, how to do that. Very, very good. And please read other people's comments in here, because I can see all of you have contributed quite very useful things here. Great. I'll share with you in the next slide some other things that you might want to consider, or you want to add to the ones that you already have on your list. This is the kind of thing that I would probably recommend. I'll just move these chats away. I hope you can see all of this screen. The crisis management team meeting agenda, you might have phase 1 and then phase 2 and 3. Remember that we said, okay, there's going to be subsequent phase where we have actual business recovery. The initial meeting, though, you're looking at, conference instructions to start with. They have to actually know how to get into the Zoom or the whatever call. So that's not not really a meeting topic, but it is certainly the first step in the meeting, then immediately considering any potential staff impact. So the first question they should ask is there any sort of injury or discomfort or health or well-being issues for staff? And with COVID, that was the case. There was a lot of panic among staff, who actually had no idea, and maybe it was unjustified, but it was still there, so the crisis management still have to deal with that and maybe come up with a communication immediately. We see the same thing when there's a terrorist attack or security incident in various places in the world where I've worked that was actually a realistic threat. And so things like in East Africa, but also in the center of Sydney, we've had a few of those types of incidents. So the first thing to do is then think about staff, and say, okay, how do we make sure they get information on how to keep safe and what the actual impacts are on them and their health and well-being of them and their families and so on. Then discussing results of damage assessment. Some of you guys touched on something similar. Making a final decision on the actions proposed by the BC facilitator. So the facilitator should have some idea of how to guide the CMT. Providing a text for BC facilitator team to disseminate to other BCP teams and the broader staff. So we had a whole team structure of 9 teams, could be 6 teams, whatever you come up with for your organization, but they should be at least put either on alert or, as in wait for further instruction. For now, stay home or get rest or something, go to sleep, but keep your phone on and so on. That kind of instruction, but also to general staff, on estimated time frames, for example, on the incident and what you expect from staff, how can they keep themselves informed, that sort of thing. Deciding on the most suitable crisis control room could be at home, as in people logging on from home, or with a partner organization or service officers. You need to somehow decide it, even if it's clear cut that you can do this from home, it may change over time, and you may find that senior people do want to get together. So that's one discussion point in there. Formally declaring disaster and invoking the BCP as appropriate. So only if it's appropriate, or you could have a partial invocation for just one business process or one site, or one particular group of people. Appointing a scribe, someone actually who documents the discussions, any issues that are arising, and who also keep track of, it's like your disaster progress log, who actually write down the milestones and the timings around it. Being available for media liaison and providing guidance for social media updates. So that is a real core CMT role as well, being available for that media interaction, and we often nominate just the CEO, the top person, to be fronting that kind of media. And the second in charge, the deputy CEO or the deputy, particular roles that you've got, or the sort of second in charge would be more focusing on the actual business continuity discussions and would be more getting on with the internal job. So media liaison, I would say the media do want to speak not just to a PR person, a corporate affairs person, they actually do want to speak to usually the top person of the company, especially if it relates also to staff illness or anything to do with staff health and well-being, or major customer impacts, where your product may be critical for a supply chain and you do want that sort of covered, that your top person can comment on that to the media. The next point there is ensuring BC facilitators regularly update the staff incident blog. Now, net in there, as we assume that you have such a thing, could be a staff portal or a secure blog you might have on things like Yammer or on your SharePoint. There may be a facility where you can share some discussions, anything that is secure. And we actually implemented with recent clients something on a Wix website, wix.com. It's free, but it does have a password entrance, a generic password, or people can use their normal generic login that they have for their normal network access, So you can use different solutions there. We found we wanted something that was externally hosted, something in the cloud, and that people could access regardless of if the internal email system in our company was working. So think about all those scenarios where your internal systems may have been melted down and all of that. So if it's in the cloud, that's really important. So put some details in there, and put some details in there also on how to update it, if needed. In this case, the facilitator has all that detail, that's fine, but you've got to think about backups for that person as well. Then another step in there is conducting notification of other major stakeholders. We're talking about ministry, regulators, strategic partners, all those really senior sort of people, shareholder groups, that kind of stuff. Responding to any inbound phone calls in dedicated time blocks, seeking a